Have you ever encountered an individual who was completely incorrect? Yet they spoke with such absolute certainty that you began to question yourself, thinking, wait, am I the one who is missing something here? The truly frightening aspect isn't their lack of accuracy. It is the fact that they are entirely blind to the notion that they could even be mistaken. This whole concept traces back to a bizarre incident in the United States during 1995. That was the year researchers discovered the story of MacArthur Wheeler, a man who pushed the boundaries of misplaced confidence to an entirely new level. One afternoon, Wheeler made the choice to rob two different banks in broad daylight, one right after the other. What makes this story truly strange is that he didn't bother with a mask. He made no effort to hide his features. He even gave a calm smile toward the overhead security monitors. When the police picked him up later that night, Wheeler was legitimately stunned to find out that the surveillance cameras had captured his image. He simply could not wrap his head around how he had been identified so quickly. The very first statement he made to the officers wasn't a confession or a plea of innocence. Instead, he uttered, "But I wore the lemon juice." Wait, what does that mean? Lemon juice? Indeed, Wheeler had discovered that lemon juice functions as a form of invisible ink. And using a brand of logic that makes you want to put your head in your hands, he convinced himself that if he smeared his face with lemon juice, he would become invisible to the video cameras. Wheeler wasn't suffering from a mental break, nor was he under the influence of any substances. He was perfectly sober. He simply had a profound belief in that broken logic. This absurd tale piqued the interest of David Dunning, who was a professor of psychology at Cornell University. Dunning found himself wondering, how is it possible for someone to be so intensely confident in something so completely ridiculous? To uncover the mystery, Dunning joined forces with his associate, Dunning-Kruger, to conduct an extensive research study. In 1999, they released a formal scientific paper titled Unskilled and Unaware of It. This publication marked the birth of the term the Dunning-Kruger effect to characterize this specific behavior. Through their investigation, they stumbled upon a harsh reality. The actual absence of proficiency is exactly what stops a person from identifying their own lack of proficiency. This connects back to the idea of metacognition, which is the mental capacity to analyze your own thought processes. For Wheeler to have understood that his theory about lemon juice was flawed, he would have required a background in optics, chemistry, and basic logical reasoning. However, because he lacked that specific foundation, his mind was unable to provide the self-reflection necessary to spot the error. Dunning and Kruger reached the conclusion that these people are caught in a double burden. The first problem is that they lack the ability to perform a task correctly. The second problem is that they lack the ability to recognize that they have failed. Consequently, they continue to move forward with a sense of total assurance. So, was Wheeler just a bizarre, isolated incident? The data suggests that is not the case at all. Dunning and Kruger decided to test this theory in the real world using ordinary people like you and me. They gathered a group of college students and had them complete assessments focused on grammar and logical thinking. Afterward, every student was asked to estimate where they stood in comparison to their classmates. The data highlighted a very ironic situation. The individuals who had the lowest scores consistently assumed they were among the top performers. They placed themselves in the 60th or 70th percentile when, in truth, they were at the very bottom of the list. Meanwhile, the students who actually excelled made a different kind of error. They tended to underestimate their own abilities. They figured that if the exam seemed simple to them, it must have been just as easy for everyone else in the room. They failed to recognize just how much they had outperformed the group. Now, let's look past university students and examine the professional world. When employees are asked to assess their own talents or their output at work, those with the least amount of background or expertise frequently give themselves much higher marks than their actual performance would justify. Conversely, people who are truly talented tend to be much more conservative when they evaluate themselves. This represents a widespread cognitive bias in how we perceive ourselves and those around us, and it is a fundamental part of the Dunning-Kruger effect. In the end, this isn't quite as complicated as it might appear. To determine if you are skilled or unskilled at a particular task, you must first have a clear picture of what true excellence looks like. But when you are a complete novice in a new area, you haven't yet witnessed its highest levels of mastery. You have only seen the exterior, and the exterior usually seems quite basic. However, this phenomenon is also tied to a fascinating mental process within the human brain. It occurs every single day, in very mundane moments that we rarely even think about. For instance, when you watch a short video that breaks down a complex subject, like macroeconomics, synthetic intelligence, or psychological theory, a creator can condense a massive topic into a few straightforward and easy-to-digest points in just a few minutes. You find yourself nodding along and feeling like you have mastered the concept. But that sensation of clarity can often be nothing more than a trick of the mind. Academics refer to this as the illusion of explanatory depth. When we listen to a well-structured explanation, our brains can easily mistake the act of following a narrative for actually understanding the mechanics of the system. Many people eventually realize they only have a few disconnected facts in their heads when they attempt to recreate the logical sequence on their own. They start to see the massive holes in their knowledge. That is the exact moment when their initial confidence begins to crumble. This doesn't imply that we are unintelligent. In fact, it demonstrates that the human mind is wired to conserve mental energy. Rather than scrutinizing every single detail of a difficult problem, it often settles for explanations that merely sound plausible. This convenient mental shortcut sometimes makes us feel like we have a better grasp of the world than we actually do. And that is precisely why the Dunning-Kruger effect pops up in every corner of life. From schools and offices to the surprisingly simplistic debates we see on social media platforms. But if this behavior is so universal, how does a person's level of confidence actually shift as they begin to learn something new? Most people assume that as you acquire more knowledge, your confidence simply grows. However, the reality is often quite the opposite. The truth is that the relationship between competence and confidence usually follows a specific four-stage evolution. And I would bet that you have been in at least one of these phases yourself. Stage 1. You have a tiny bit of knowledge, but you believe you are an expert. This is the moment you first dive into a subject, like day trading or repairing electronics. You read a couple of blog posts and suddenly feel like a master of the craft. In truth, your understanding is incredibly shallow, yet your confidence is at its peak. You are eager to debate others and even try to instruct them, because you don't yet see how deep the rabbit hole actually goes. Stage 2. You begin to realize how little you actually know. As you continue to study further, the subject starts to feel much more difficult. You become aware of a mountain of information that you never even knew existed. At this point, your self-assurance takes a dive. You might feel totally incompetent and completely overwhelmed. But the irony is that this is when you are making the most significant progress, because you are finally seeing the situation for what it really is. Stage 3. You start developing genuine expertise. Rather than giving up, you persist with your studies and your practice. Your confidence begins to climb again, but this time the growth is slow and steady. You no longer claim to be absolutely certain about every detail because you respect the vastness of the topic. Where sense of confidence is now rooted in your actual abilities, not just a gut feeling. Stage 4. You reach the level of an expert. This is the point where you truly grasp the nuances of the subject. You possess deep insights and years of practical experience. But here is the odd part. People at this level are often less vocal about their confidence than the beginners in stage 1. They tend to be very cautious and are fully aware that errors are still possible. The primary issue is that the majority of people get stuck at stage 1, yet they are convinced they have already reached stage 4. This really isn't as complex as we often make it out to be. When you first start hitting the gym, you learn a couple of basic lifts and feel like you have mastered fitness. But once you start training with a high-level coach, you realize that your grip, your breathing, and every tiny technical error you ignored before are actually critical. The problem isn't that you are trying to lie to yourself. It's that you have never been exposed to what a high standard actually looks like. When your knowledge is thin, everything seems easy. As your knowledge grows, you start to perceive the actual complexity. At that stage, your early confidence fades away. Not because your skills have diminished, but because you are finally noticing things that were invisible to you before. This is the central paradox of the Dunning-Kruger effect. The more you understand a topic, the more you realize how much you still have to learn. And that nagging feeling of "I'm not quite there yet" can actually be a clear indicator that you are moving closer to the truth. Now, consider a highly talented surgeon who earns a high income and suddenly decides to gamble all his savings on the stock market or a new cryptocurrency. Because he is a genius in the surgical suite, he assumes he can easily navigate the world of finance. After just a few days of reading the news, that is the exact moment he drops right into stage 1 of the Dunning-Kruger effect without even noticing. The most hazardous thing about brilliant people who get caught in this trap is this: they are incredibly good at rationalizing. When a person of average intelligence makes a mistake, they might run out of excuses quickly. However, a highly intelligent person can use sophisticated logic to deceive themselves and carefully mask their own blunders. They seek out all sorts of confirmation bias to protect their perspective, and their massive ego prevents them from taking a step back. A person who is truly wise isn't someone who claims to know everything. It is someone who has the courage to define the boundaries of their own knowledge, and who can smile and admit, "In this particular area, I am still a student." So, what is the fix? Once your brain enters this state of illusion, relying on willpower alone is nearly impossible. You need a set of tools to force your mind to pause. Here are 4 specific strategies. First, practice the art of staying quiet and observing. It sounds like a simple task, but it is actually very difficult to execute. The next time you find yourself in a conversation about a trending topic, like AI or environmental policy, don't rush to give your opinion immediately. Instead, remain silent for the first 10 minutes of the talk. Just listen to what everyone else is contributing. Pay close attention to who is speaking from a place of experience and who is just being emotional. When you stay quiet, your brain has the space to process information instead of just trying to win a fight. You might find that you don't know as much as you originally assumed. Second, seek out people who don't like you. No, I am not suggesting you should start conflicts. I mean, you should find people who fundamentally disagree with your perspective. We have a tendency to surround ourselves with people who confirm our beliefs and give us praise. That creates an echo chamber where you only hear your own thoughts being repeated back to you. If you want to find out where your blind spots are, talk to the person who is your harshest critic. Listen to the reasons why they think you are mistaken. Instead of getting angry and fighting back, sit down and ask yourself, If this person is even 1% correct, what does that 1% look like? That tiny bit of truth might prevent you from making a huge mistake. The feedback that hurts the most is often the most necessary. Third, apply the Feynman technique. This approach was created by Richard Feynman, a physicist who won the Nobel Prize. He had a very effective way to strip away our mental illusions. If you believe you truly grasp a concept, take a piece of paper and try to explain it so clearly that a 10-year-old could follow it. The rule is very strict: no technical jargon and no big words. If you start to struggle, write in circles or use complex terminology to hide the gaps in your logic. That is a major warning sign. You might be falling for the Dunning-Kruger effect. The reality is that you probably don't understand the topic as well as you think you do. This is a very quick way to test your actual competence. Don't believe me? Try to explain exactly how a jet engine generates thrust, or what specifically causes economic inflation. You will likely find yourself feeling confused very quickly. Fourth, always keep your own blind spots in mind. Imagine there is a glowing sign in your head that constantly says, "I could be wrong." Whenever you feel a surge of absolute confidence or feel the urge to call someone else ignorant, look at that sign. Being overconfident is usually a symptom of missing data. The more you actually know, the more complicated things look, and the less likely you are to claim that you are 100% certain. If you find that you are always totally sure about every topic in life, from who will win a sports game to how to manage a national economy, that is the exact moment you should start to worry about your own judgment. Ultimately, the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't just a label we should use to mock other people. It is a vital lesson in self-awareness so we don't end up like Mr. Wheeler and his bottle of lemon juice. We are living in an era where information is accessible everywhere. You can spend 5 minutes on your phone and learn a little bit about almost any subject. That convenience has produced a massive wave of self-proclaimed online experts. Everyone believes they have the answers. Everyone thinks their viewpoint is the only correct one. But think back to the story of Wheeler and his lemon juice. He was extremely confident. He even gave a smile to the security cameras. The price he ended up paying was his own freedom. The cost of living in an illusion can be incredibly high. It can cost you your finances, your personal relationships, or the opportunity to actually become great at something. Now, the decision is in your hands. Do you want to cling to that false sense of confidence and let people laugh at you behind your back? Or are you brave enough to admit that you still have a lot to learn? Are you willing to sit with the uncomfortable feeling of being a beginner so you can actually get better? The truth is that you can never improve if you are convinced you have already reached the top. Admitting that you don't know something isn't a sign of weakness. In fact, it is one of the most courageous and intelligent things a human being can do. When you are able to say, "I don't know, please explain it to me," an entire world of new information opens up for you. True intelligence usually begins at the exact moment you are brave enough to realize how little you actually know. Letting go of the desperate need to always be right will instantly lift a massive weight off your shoulders. It is completely normal to feel awkward or entirely lost when stepping into a space you have never explored before. Acknowledging your own limitations is never a fatal weakness, but rather a profound act of deep and quiet courage. What is one specific area of your life where stepping back to become a curious beginner would serve you well? If this resonated with you, briefly share your thoughts below so we can hold space for these honest realizations together. May you always find genuine peace and quiet confidence in standing softly at the outer edges of your understanding.